you take it seriously enough that in your recent appearance on Joe Rogan alongside comedian and libertarian Dave Smith, I'm certain that anyone watching this by now has seen that interview, but for those who haven't, go look it up after the show. Um, you feel strongly enough about this that straight out the gate in this interview, where you were ostensibly there to promote your new book, you went right for it and criticized Rogan and Dave Smith for having kind of uncritical conversations, let's say, even praiseworthy conversations with amateur historians and others who are playing around in the way that you described David Irving playing around.
Yes.
Why were you willing to die on this hill? And let me explain what I mean by that. Joe Rogan has a bigger audience than probably all of CNN in a month. I mean, there's just no comparison. He is the King Kong of the podcasting space. There's a reason that everyone wants to go on that show, especially people promoting their books or promoting their work. And there's every incentive to keep him happy. So you will continue to get invited on. You get invited on that show and you go right for it in challenging him and challenging Dave Smith. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I couldn't not. I mean, I just have a basic policy in my life, which is that if I, and I sometimes give this advice to students when I speak at universities. It's like, you just don't do things that make you feel worse about yourself. If there's something that's going to demoralize you, that you're going to feel terrible about afterwards, feel lesser about yourself, just try not to do it. I literally have it in this sort of, could I look myself in the mirror tomorrow if I didn't do this? And the answer is no. And so I do it. I don't know if it's a hill to die on. The number of hills that I've been on in my life and the number of dying I've done. And so I don't know. I genuinely, it was not, I don't have anything against Joe. I was surprised that after a year and a half in Israel, 2 years of Ukraine, on 3 years, there had been so few people on who had in any ways mainstream views really about either conflict. I was surprised that he hadn't had anyone on who really, or almost no one on, who'd explained the Ukrainian case for self-defense against Putin. And I'm more alarmed in the last year and a half even to find that he had so few people on who'd explained the justification for Israel's war in Gaza, whilst going to people who I'm afraid, to tread back into the cesspool I managed to find myself in the weeks after that interview, I'm afraid is people who don't know what they're talking about. And I feel there's a very there's a lot that I feel like I trod into on that, but nevertheless, I just felt I had to. I don't like that. I don't like the platforming of endless, weird, kooky voices from semi-self-taught people. So here's the problem as I see it.
But is the problem with being self-taught, or is
No, it's not. I mean, as I stressed repeatedly in the interview, anyone can say anything they want within the confines of the law. Anyone can have a view on anything. I'm for that. I spent much of my career advocating for that. But that it doesn't mean just because some experts have let themselves down or let all of us down, it doesn't mean that you should simply lift the sluices of your society and allow all the sewage to just flow through it. And that's what I see happening. And you see, the problem here is Joe is a very skilled podcaster. People don't realize how good he is until you see somebody who can't do what he does. But if he wants somebody to discuss MMA fighting, you will notice that he does not invite comedian Dave Smith, because comedian Dave Smith has never been in a fight or to a fight, or maybe he has, but I don't think he'd know how to talk about the jiu-jitsu. Maybe he would. Maybe it surprised me. But Joe would not have him on to talk about something that Joe knows about. So why does he have him on to talk about a conflict that the guy knows so little about? Somebody recently upped on X a snippet of an interview that Joe did a while ago with one of these pseudo-historians, where he says, nobody has a right to say that you're a neo-Nazi or Hitler apologist unless they've imbibed your work and listened to all of it. And, it's like talking to somebody who thinks they know about a country who's never been there. And I think, yeah, that was one of the points I was trying to make. I mean, I was pretty alarmed by I don't really follow fires I've started in general, but I was pretty alarmed by
the reaction.
I was pretty alarmed by the number of people who found it, including Joe and Dave, found it to be some kind of really weird, snooty, elitist thing to say, if you're going to write about a place, you should have been there or know about it. You should do some of the legwork. I was pretty alarmed about that simply because in old media, and I certainly, that was a standout. Like, good God, the old media, legacy media, let us all down in ways that you and I could riff about for a fortnight. But there are standards. One of them, for instance, is that you cannot file columns about Gaza if you've never left Berkeley or San Diego or wherever. And just to play it another way around, I mean, if what I was saying was just such basic journalistic hygiene, which is, yes, if you're going to talk endlessly about a conflict, you ought to do what I do and at least put in the legwork. And it's kind of, in a way, it's insulting to all the many journalists who put themselves under dangerous and difficult positions to say, that's just, you don't need to do that. There's no, I can tell as much by sitting in Austin reading Google. And just to put it another way around, if there was a guy in China who was on Chinese state media, what other type is there, and endlessly wrote about the United States of America, didn't speak English, and had never been to the USA, but who endlessly told the audiences in China that America in the 21st century is no different from America in the 19th century. In fact, the KKK roams the streets of New York freely and persecutes our black brothers and sisters, and that segregation is still going on, and all sorts of other stuff like that. If we got wind of this guy, and we found out this is a guy in China who's never been to America, and he's telling the Chinese people about America, and it's so wrong, we would laugh at that. We would think it ridiculous that such a person had platforms. So why, I ask, should it be the case that endlessly, if you want to hear about the reality of Israel and Gaza, get the comedian guy on, who's never been to the region, as he admitted on that podcast. In fact, not being to the region seemed to be some kind of badge of honor. It meant that he wasn't tainted by some of the perspectives he might have got. On the other hand, you'd have noticed that Israel isn't a white supremacist society governing a concentration camp in Gaza.
I think one of the dynamics at play here, and this goes beyond the conversation that you had with Smith on Rogan, I think it's just a bigger dynamic playing out right now, is over the past decade, probably longer, the left was in the business of making everything taboo. Even biological reality became taboo.
Exactly. And this is a backlash.
And the reaction the cultural right is having, the right, like broadly defined here, and I think it's breaking apart in all kinds of interesting ways, is no. You guys said everything taboo. Mm-hmm. We're making nothing taboo. And so the second someone comes around, as you tried to do in that conversation, and say, actually, you know what? The stigmatization of Holocaust denial, that's a good stigma. Mm-hmm. That's something we should keep around. The standard of going to a place that you write about, that's something we should keep around. What the listener, I think, can hear in that situation is, this is a person calling for cancel culture. This is a person calling for gatekeeping. And I find that dynamic extremely frustrating.
It's very frustrating.
How do you get out of that trap?
One, you got to exercise hygiene on your own side. And the fact that people have been kept out of the conversation who should have been in the conversation does not mean that absolutely everybody should be given the platform to spread untrue things. And it's going to be, yeah, I mean, like like everything difficult in this life, it's going to take some dexterity, because all these fine corners that end up mattering, they do need careful thinking and careful treading. My fear on it is that I think that something, among other things, something quite dishonest has been going on, which is that Joe and Dave were covering for a couple of people in particular who are mates of theirs, who they deny are bad actors. And yet the more I look into them, the more appalling the bad actorness is. Just this morning, somebody sent something to me of one of the mates of one of these historians who's anti-Churchill and so on. And this is one of his mates and somebody he cites. And this, I won't give the publicity to the person by naming him. This guy in this video I watched this morning goes to the Holocaust Memorial in DC and just does a video about what horse shit it all is.
The Holocaust.
Yeah. And it's all seems to me to be kind of, lame and gay and fake. And we're all being told to believe this just to guilt us and, not falling for it anymore. You don't want to be in the orbit of somebody like that. You don't want to be encouraging that. You can easily as a right, and somebody who's been a small C conservative all my life. I mean, I had probably a lapse at university of a period where for about 5 hours I was on the left. but I've been broadly on the right most of my life. And just as the left should be totally not tolerating Che Guevara-ism, Maoism, Stalinism, Leninism, don't let the right, when they're on the up, when they're working, when they're actually doing some of the things that restrain some of the obscenities and overreaches of the left, don't use that time to try Hitlerism again. For God's sake, don't be the thing that your enemies said you might be. This shouldn't be that difficult. And I intervened on that episode on Rogan because I just felt I had to. And I'm glad I did, but I'm sorry that some people have willfully or otherwise decided to completely misrepresent what I was saying. But as you know, Barry, one of the things about being in the public square is that not only do you have to forge your words for people to understand them clearly, you also have to forge them in such a way that a malevolent actor will not deliberately misrepresent them.
Not possible.